The Master of the Forest. This story is mine, not something I heard from a friend of a friend, not something I read on some forum late at night. I lived through it. Every moment, every sound, every breath of cold air on the back of my neck. I am telling you this because I need someone to believe me, or at least I need someone to help me understand why I still hear those three knocks every single night. Three knocks. Slow, deliberate, patient. The same ones I heard in the forest that night. My name is Martin Avila, 32 years old, software developer. 2 years ago, I moved into a cabin deep in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico to escape everything I hated about the world. The noise, the crowds, the endless demands of other human beings. I thought isolation would save me. I thought being alone would finally give me peace. I was wrong. I have been drinking water from a stream near my cabin for 2 years, every single day. The water was clean, cold, sweet in a way that city water could never be. I never thought twice about it, never wondered where it came from or what might be living in those depths. I did not know that every sip was a signature on a contract I never agreed to sign. Now, when I close my eyes, I do not see darkness. I see the forest, not like a memory or a dream. I feel it, every root crawling beneath the soil, every leaf breathing in the night air, every creature moving through the shadows. And when I look in the mirror, the eyes staring back at me are no longer brown. They are green, green like moss, green like leaves, green like something ancient that has taken root inside me. But I should start from the beginning. From the night everything changed. I have always hated people, not in a violent way, not in a way that made me want to hurt anyone. I simply could not stand being around them. The sound of strangers laughing, the smell of too many bodies in a subway car. The way people talked without saying anything, filling the air with noise just to avoid silence. When I was younger, I dreamed of living in a big city. Mexico City seemed like the center of the universe, all those lights, all those opportunities. I moved there when I was 22, full of ambition and hope. 10 years later, I hated every square meter of that concrete prison. The irony is not lost on me. I despised human contact, but I was addicted to the internet, forums, Reddit, Twitter, places where I could connect with people without actually being near them, without smelling them or hearing their voices or feeling their presence invade my space. Digital connection was the only kind I could tolerate. That is why I became a software developer. I could work from anywhere. All I needed was a laptop and an internet connection. I had been working remotely long before the pandemic made it fashionable. When I found the cabin, I knew immediately that it was where I belonged. It sat at the top of a hill at the end of a dirt road so narrow that my side mirrors scraped against tree trunks on both sides. The building itself was old but solid, built from local stone and wood that had weathered decades of mountain storms. Around it the forest pressed in from every direction, ancient trees so tall their canopy blocked out the sky. The real estate agent told me the place was usually rented as a digital detox retreat. People came here for a few days to disconnect from technology, to cleanse themselves of the modern world. The first thing he told me was that there was no internet. That should have been a problem. It became a challenge instead. Inside the cabin, the air always carried a faint smell of damp wood and old smoke from the fireplace that had not been lit in years. The floorboards creaked in specific spots that I learned to avoid at night. The walls were thick enough to muffle most sounds from outside, but sometimes when the wind was just right, I could hear the trees groaning as they swayed. The nearest village was 5 kilometers down the mountain. My closest neighbor lived more than 2 kilometers away, an old woman who raised goats and rarely left her property. Cell phone signal was unreliable at best, usually hovering at 1 bar before disappearing entirely. I was alone, truly completely alone. For the first few months, it was everything I had ever wanted. The internet problem required creativity. No service provider would send technicians up that road. The satellite options were too expensive and too slow for the work I needed to do. So I did what any desperate programmer would do. I ran my own cable. half a kilometer of outdoor-rated Ethernet cable purchased in bulk from an industrial supplier in the city. I spent 3 weeks stringing it from a connection point in the village all the way up to my cabin. I hung it from trees using hooks I screwed into the bark. I built makeshift poles in the places where the trees were too far apart. I waterproofed every connection with electrical tape and silicone. The cable crossed a stream about 200 meters from my cabin. That stream became my water source. Every morning I would walk down with empty jugs and fill them with the clearest, coldest water I had ever tasted. It came from somewhere deep in the mountain, filtered through layers of rock and soil, emerging pure and sweet. I never boiled it, never filtered it. It seemed unnecessary. The water was perfect just as it was. That was my first mistake. The cable broke every few months. Sometimes a falling branch would tear it loose. Sometimes an animal would chew through the insulation. Once I found a clean cut that suggested human hands, though I never discovered who or why. Each time I would grab my tools and my flashlight and walk along the cable until I found the break. I had done it so many times that it became routine, annoying but manageable. I was never afraid of the forest at night. I had a tactical flashlight, the expensive kind that could blind a man if you shone it in his eyes. I knew the terrain. I knew the sounds. I had walked those paths hundreds of times in darkness without incident. Some people fear what they cannot see. I feared only what I could see, and in the forest at night there was nothing to see but trees and shadows. That was before I learned that some shadows can move on their own. The night before everything changed, I was lying in bed around 11 o'clock, scrolling through my phone in the blue glow of the screen. Outside, the forest was quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, just the deep, heavy silence that settles over the mountains after dark. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, not from the front door, not from any door at all, from the back wall of the cabin. The wall that faced directly into the forest with no path, no clearing, nothing but dense trees for hundreds of meters. Knock, 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 slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, like someone counting out a rhythm only they could hear. I sat up in bed. My heart was beating faster, but I forced myself to stay calm. There had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. A branch, that was it. A branch from one of the trees near the cabin, swaying in the wind and tapping against the wood. I listened for the wind, for the sound of leaves rustling or trees creaking. Nothing. The air outside was completely still. I walked to the window and looked out. The trees stood motionless, their branches hanging limp in the windless night. The moon was barely visible through the clouds, casting just enough light to see the shapes of the nearest trunks. Nothing was moving. Nothing could have made that sound. The mind has a way of protecting itself from things it cannot accept. I told myself I must have imagined it. Or maybe the wood was settling the way old houses sometimes creak and groan. Or maybe an animal had climbed onto the roof and knocked something loose. I did not go outside to check. I pulled the curtains closed and went back to bed. But sleep did not come easily that night, and somewhere in the back of my mind a small voice was whispering that something was very wrong. The next night my internet went out at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I was in the middle of uploading code for a project with a deadline at 8 o'clock. The progress bar froze at 67%. The connection icon turned red. My screen displayed the message I had come to dread: no network connection. I checked the rotor. Red lights. I checked the modem. No signal. The cable had broken. Again. Under normal circumstances, I would have waited until morning, but this deadline was not negotiable. The client was in New York and they expected the delivery before their business day began. If I missed it, I would lose the contract. Months of work gone. I had no choice. I put on my heavy jacket, the one lined with wool that kept out the mountain cold. I strapped my headlamp around my forehead and grabbed the tactical flashlight as backup. I stuffed my repair tools into a backpack along with extra tape and cable connectors. My phone showed 73% battery and 1 bar of signal. Enough for emergencies, I thought. When I opened the front door and stepped outside, I stopped immediately. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier than usual, thicker. It pressed against my skin like a wet blanket, carrying smells I had never noticed before. Damp earth stronger than normal, rotting leaves. And underneath those familiar scents, something else. Something sharp and organic, like fresh tree sap. Like the smell of wood that has just been cut, still bleeding its life into the air. The silence was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet I'd grown used to, but something deeper, something that felt intentional. No insects chirping, no owls calling, no wind moving through the branches. The forest was not just quiet, the forest was listening. I swept my flashlight across the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks and branches and the thick undergrowth between them. Everything was still. Everything was exactly where it should be. But the feeling would not go away, the sensation of being watched, of eyes I could not see following my every movement. I turned around. Nothing there, just my cabin warm light glowing through the windows. The paranoia is getting to you, I told myself. 2 years of isolation will do that to anyone. You are imagining things. I started walking toward the cable path. The first 50 meters were normal. The cable hung where I'd placed it, strung between trees and posts leading down the hill toward the village. My boots crunched against fallen leaves and snapped small twigs. The sounds were loud in the silence, echoing strangely in the still air. Then I reached the point where the main trail split off toward the stream. I stopped. The trail was gone, not overgrown, not covered with debris, simply not there. The ground where I'd walked hundreds of times before was now dense with undergrowth, bushes and ferns growing as if they had been there for years, as if no human foot had ever pressed down that soil. I swept my flashlight back and forth, searching for any sign of the familiar path. Nothing. The forest had swallowed it whole. I must have taken a wrong turn, I thought. In the dark, everything looks different. I just need to get my bearings. I looked for my landmarks, the twisted oak tree that marked the halfway point, the arrow-shaped boulder I used as a reference, the lightning-scarred stump of the old pine. All of them were there, exactly where they should be. I was in the right place, but the trail was gone. For a long moment I stood there in the darkness, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The rational part of my mind was scrambling for explanations. A mudslide, perhaps, or some kind of rapid plant growth triggered by recent rain. Or maybe I really was lost despite the landmarks and the trail was just a few meters to the left or right. But another part of my mind, the ancient part that humans have carried since we lived in caves and feared the darkness, was screaming something entirely different. The forest moved. I wanted to dismiss the thought. I wanted to laugh at myself for being ridiculous. Trees do not move. Forests do not rearrange themselves. The world does not work that way. But standing there in that unnatural silence, surrounded by trees that might or might not have been in those exact positions an hour ago, I could not shake the feeling. The forest was watching me. The trees, the ground, the darkness itself. Everything around me had become aware of my presence, and whatever was out there did not want me to find the trail. I could have turned back. I should have turned back. The deadline was not worth dying over. Nothing was worth whatever might be waiting in those shadows. But I have always been stubborn, always needed to know, always had to see for myself what was behind the door that should stay closed. I gripped my flashlight tighter and stepped off the vanished trail, following the cable deeper into the forest. Somewhere in the darkness behind me, something laughed. Very soft, almost inaudible, like a child giggling at a joke only they understood. I did not turn around. I kept walking. Whatever was waiting for me in that forest, I was about to find it. Or maybe it was about to find me. I followed the cable because it was the only thing I could trust. The trail had vanished. The forest had rearranged itself around me, but the cable was still there. I could see it. I could touch it. It was real in a way that everything else had stopped being. My left hand stayed on the cable as I walked, fingers tracing the familiar plastic coating. My right hand held the tactical flashlight, sweeping the beam back and forth across the terrain ahead. The light seemed weaker than before, the darkness pressing in from all sides like something hungry. I had been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I noticed the first problem. My phone was dying. I pulled it from my pocket to check the time. The screen flickered, displaying a battery icon I'd never seen before. The number next to it made no sense. 73% when I left the cabin. Now it showed 31. As I watched the number drop to 24, then 18, then 7, the screen went black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I held it down for 10 seconds the way you do when a device freezes. Still nothing. The phone was dead. Completely, inexplicably dead, as if someone had reached inside and drained every last electron from the battery. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the dark rectangle in my hand. This phone was less than a year old. The battery had been at 73%. I had checked it before leaving. There was no way it could have died this fast, unless something had killed it. The thought came unbidden, and I pushed it away immediately. Batteries malfunction, electronics fail. There was nothing supernatural about a phone dying in the cold mountain air, but it was not cold. That was the strange thing. The night was warmer than usual, almost humid. The kind of weather that should have been good for battery life, not bad. I shoved the dead phone back into my pocket and kept walking. The flashlight was still working. That was what mattered. 2 minutes later, the flashlight started to flicker. The beam stuttered bright, then dim, then bright again, like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. I smacked the side of the housing with my palm, the universal fix for malfunctioning electronics. The flickering stopped for a moment, then resumed. I checked the battery compartment. The batteries were fresh, installed just last week. They should have lasted for hours. The light dimmed to half its normal brightness, then a quarter. The shadows around me grew longer, darker, reaching toward my feet like fingers stretching across the forest floor. It is the cold, I told myself, even though I knew it was not cold. It is affecting the batteries. It happens sometimes. Nothing unusual. The lies we tell ourselves to keep moving forward. The explanations we invent because the alternative is too terrifying to accept. I kept walking. The cable led me deeper into the forest through sections I had walked many times before, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees seemed taller, their trunks thicker, their branches reaching lower as if trying to touch me as I passed. The undergrowth was denser than I remembered, thorny bushes and tangled vines that caught at my clothes and scratched at my hands. Then the cable turned left. Not a gentle curve, a sharp, almost 90-degree angle leading away from the direction of the village and into a part of the forest I had never explored. I stopped and stared at the cable disappearing into the darkness. This was impossible. I had installed this cable myself. I knew exactly where it went. It ran straight from the village to my cabin with no turns sharper than the natural curves of the terrain. Someone must have moved it, I thought, cut it, and reconnected it in a different location. Maybe the same person who had cut it before. But why would anyone do that? And how could they have done it tonight in the few hours since I last had internet? The smell hit me then. Wet earth, stronger than before, mixed with something else, something organic and wrong, like meat. Not rotting meat, but fresh meat. The smell of something that had just been killed, its blood still warm, its flesh still quivering. I gagged and covered my nose with my free hand. The smell seemed to be coming from the direction the cable was pointing, from whatever waited in that unexplored section of forest. Every instinct told me to turn back, to forget about the deadline. Forget about the cable, forget about everything except getting back to the safety of my cabin. But curiosity is a powerful thing. And something else was pulling me forward, something I could not name. A compulsion that felt almost like a hand on my back, pushing me gently but firmly toward the darkness ahead. I am not a superstitious person. I do not believe in ghosts or demons or things that go bump in the night. I believe in logic, in cause and effect, in the rational explanations that science provides for every mystery. But standing there in that forest with my phone dead and my flashlight dying and the cable leading somewhere it should not go, I felt something I had not felt since childhood. I felt afraid of the dark. I followed the cable anyway. The terrain changed as I walked. The ground became softer, wetter, my boots sinking slightly with each step and making obscene sucking sounds when I lifted them. There were puddles in some places, dark water reflecting the dim beam of my flashlight. The air grew heavier, thick with moisture and that terrible smell of fresh death. Strange sounds reached my ears, dripping water, creaking wood, and something else, something that might have been breathing. Deep, slow breaths that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I was so focused on the sounds ahead that I almost missed the one behind me. Footsteps, not animal footsteps, not the random crunch of a deer or the skittering of a small mammal. These were deliberate, rhythmic, the sound of something walking on two legs matching my pace exactly. When I walked faster, the footsteps quickened. When I slowed down, they slowed too. I spun around, flashlight raised like a weapon. Nothing, just trees and shadows and the cable stretching back into the darkness. You are imagining things, I told myself. The forest plays tricks on the ears, echoes bounce off trees, sounds travel strangely in these mountains. I turned back around and kept walking. The footsteps resumed. This time I did not stop. I did not turn around. I just walked faster, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The flashlight beam was so dim now that I could barely see 3 meters ahead. And then it died. No warning, no final flicker. One moment I had light, and the next I had nothing. The darkness that swallowed me was absolute. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off where your eyes eventually adjust and you can make out shapes. This was the darkness of being buried alive, the darkness of a world with no light at all. I could not see my hand in front of my face. I could not see the trees around me. I could not see anything except the inside of my own eyelids. I fumbled with the flashlight, shaking it, smacking it against my palm, pressing the button over and over again. Nothing. The batteries that should have lasted for hours were completely dead, just like my phone, just like everything else in this forest that belonged to the modern world. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move in any direction. One wrong step could send me tumbling into a ravine or walking face first into a tree trunk. Without light, I was blind and helpless. That was when I heard the breathing. Not my own breathing. Something else. Something right behind me. Close. So close I could feel the warmth of it on the back of my neck. In, out, slow, steady, patient. Something was standing directly behind me, something that had not been there a moment ago, something that had appeared in the darkness without making a sound. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, but my legs would not move. My muscles had locked in place, frozen by a terror so primal it bypassed my conscious mind entirely. The breathing continued, in, out, and then I felt something else, a hand. Or something like a hand, reaching toward my shoulder. I could feel the air moving as it approached, could sense the presence of fingers inches from my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut as if not seeing could protect me from whatever was about to happen. The touch never came. Instead, I heard laughter, soft, high-pitched, the giggling of a child who has just played a wonderful trick on someone. But wrong. The sound was wrong in a way I could not explain, like someone who had heard laughter described but never actually experienced it, like something trying to imitate human joy without understanding what joy meant. The giggling faded into the darkness, moving away from me, receding into the forest like a dream, dissolving upon waking. I stood there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. Then my flashlight came back on, not gradually, not with a flicker or a warning. It simply blazed to life at full brightness, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it, as if the darkness had been a test and I had passed. I spun around, sweeping the beam in every direction. Nothing. No one. Just trees and undergrowth and the cable stretching into the distance. But something was different. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The trees had moved. Not all of them, but some. The distinctive twisted oak that I'd used as a landmark was now on my left instead of my right. The boulder I'd passed a few minutes ago was nowhere to be seen. The configuration of the forest around me had changed while I was blind. I knew those trees had been in different positions. I was certain of it. But certainty meant nothing in this place. Reality itself seemed to be shifting, rearranging, becoming something other than what it had been. In this forest, I realized nothing stays where you leave it. Not trails, not trees, not truth itself. I wanted to go back. I needed to go back. But when I looked for the cable that would lead me home, I saw that it continued forward deeper into the changed forest. I could not tell anymore which direction was which. The cable was my only guide, and it wanted me to keep going. So I kept going. I do not know how long I walked after that. Time had stopped meaning anything. Minutes felt like hours. Hours might have been minutes. The forest existed outside of normal time in a place where clocks meant nothing and dawn might never come. Then I saw the light, yellow, warm, artificial, cutting through the trees maybe 100 meters ahead. For a moment hope surged through me. Another person, a cabin, a road, something from the normal world, the world of electricity and logic and things that made sense. I ran toward the light. As I got closer, I could hear the sound of an engine, a vehicle, idling in the middle of the forest, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I burst through a wall of undergrowth and stopped. It was a pickup truck. Old maybe 20 years, the kind farmers used to haul supplies up mountain roads. The headlights were on the engine, running exhaust curling from the tailpipe in white wisps. But something was wrong. The truck was sinking. The front half had already disappeared into the ground, not into a hole or a sinkhole, but into the earth itself. The soil had opened up like a mouth and was swallowing the vehicle whole, and there were roots, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They crawled over the body of the truck like the tentacles of some enormous creature. They slithered through the windows, wrapped around the side mirrors, wormed their way into every gap and crack. They were pulling, I realized. The roots were pulling the truck down. The metal groaned and shrieked as it bent under the pressure. The windshield cracked spiderwebbing outward before collapsing inward entirely. The doors buckled and twisted, folding in on themselves like paper. And underneath all those sounds, beneath the screaming metal and the grinding earth, I heard something else. Chewing, slow, methodical. The sound of something enormous, eating something that had once been metal and glass and rubber. The smell hit me then. Engine oil and hot metal and that same terrible meat smell from before. It rolled over me in waves thick enough to taste, coating my tongue with copper and rot. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything except stand there and watch that truck disappear into the hungry earth. But I could not move. The same paralysis that had gripped me in the darkness had returned, locking my muscles in place, forcing me to witness something that should not be possible. The truck sank lower. The hood vanished. The roof followed. The taillights glowed red through the churning soil, then went dark. Within 60 seconds, the truck was gone. The earth closed over it like water smoothing after a stone is sunk. All that remained was a slight bulge in the ground, like something being digested just below the surface. The roots retreated, slithering back into the soil, disappearing as if they had never existed. And then silence. The engine sound was gone. The groaning metal was gone. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I threw up. I fell to my knees and emptied my stomach onto the forest floor, retching until there was nothing left but bile and horror. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold myself up. My entire body was trembling. The ground just ate a truck, I thought. The ground just swallowed a 2-ton vehicle like it was nothing. I knelt there in the dirt, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. There had to be an explanation. Sinkholes, underground caves, some geological phenomenon that created pockets of unstable soil. But sinkholes did not have roots. Sinkholes did not chew. I forced myself to stand. I had to get out of here. I had to find my way back to the cabin, back to the world that made sense, back to electricity and internet, and the comfortable lies of modern life. I turned to run and stopped. The trees were moving, not swaying, not bending in the wind, moving. Walking, the way humans walk, except these were not humans. These were trees. 30-meter-tall ancient oaks and pines, lifting their roots out of the ground like legs and taking steps across the forest floor. The ground shook with each footfall. I heard the sound of roots tearing free from soil, a wet ripping noise that sounded like flesh being torn from bone. I heard wood groaning and creaking, the complaints of giants being forced to move after centuries of standing still. And I heard something else, a whisper. No, not a whisper. Thousands of whispers, millions of them. The sound of leaves brushing against each other, but wrong, deliberate, like voices trying to form words in a language that human ears were not meant to understand. One tree moved, then another, then a dozen, then more than I could count. They were surrounding me. From every direction the forest was closing in. Trees stepped into position like soldiers forming ranks, their branches interlocking overhead, their roots spreading across the ground to block any escape route. I tried to run. I picked a gap between two moving trunks and sprinted toward it. The gap closed before I could reach it. Two trees stepped together, their bark brushing with a sound like thunder, and suddenly there was no gap anymore. Just a wall of wood and leaves and the smell of ancient, patient life. I spun around looking for another way out. Every direction was the same, trees everywhere moving, shifting, reorganizing themselves into a prison of living wood. My flashlight flickered and died again. In the darkness the movement continued. I could hear it all around me. The groaning of wood, the tearing of roots, the whisper of leaves that sounded almost like laughter. I fell to my knees. There was nowhere to run. Nothing I could do. I was trapped in the middle of a forest that had come alive, surrounded by things that should not exist, waiting for whatever happened next. This is how I die, I thought. In the dark, alone, swallowed by the earth like that truck. I waited for the ground to open beneath me, for the roots to crawl up my legs, for the forest to consume me the way it had consumed everything else. Nothing happened. The sound stopped. The movement ceased. The forest held its breath. And then I heard footsteps. Not the sound of trees walking, human footsteps, boots crunching on leaves and twigs coming closer with each step. I could not see anything in the darkness. I could only listen as those footsteps approached steady and unhurried the gait of someone who had all the time in the world. They stopped directly in front of me. I knelt there in the dark, head bowed, waiting. A voice spoke, male, middle-aged, calm in a way that made the calmness itself seem threatening. "You should not be here at this hour." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I could not quite grasp. My flashlight came back on. I looked up. A man stood before me, ordinary-looking, middle-aged, maybe 50, with weathered skin and calloused hands. He wore the clothes of a farmer or a woodsman, jeans faded from years of use, a flannel shirt with frayed cuffs, rubber boots caked with mud. But there was nothing ordinary about the way the forest responded to his presence. The trees around us were bending toward him, not moving, not walking, just bending, leaning in his direction like flowers turning toward the sun. And beneath my knees I could feel the roots shifting in the soil, crawling toward where he stood. The forest loved him, or feared him, or both. His eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that I will never forget. They were brown, Normal brown, the color of earth and bark and ordinary things. But the depth behind that color was wrong. When I looked into those eyes, I felt like I was falling into a well that had no bottom. A well that had existed before humans walked the earth, before mammals evolved, before life itself crawled out of the primordial sea. When he smiled, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "You have been drinking from the stream," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "For how long?" I tried to answer. My voice would not work. I had to swallow twice before the words came out cracked and weak. 2 years. The man nodded slowly as if I had confirmed something he already knew. "Then you have already agreed," he said, "whether you knew it or not." He reached down and offered me his hand. The trees around us swayed, though there was no wind. "Come," he said. "There is much you need to understand about what you have become." I did not take his hand. Some part of me, some animal instinct buried deep beneath the layers of modern civilization, screamed that touching him would be a mistake, that his skin would be cold or hot or somehow wrong. That contact with this man would change me in ways I could not undo. He did not seem offended. He simply lowered his hand and smiled that terrible smile again. "Careful," he said. "That is good. The forest respects caution." I found my voice. It came out as a croak, barely human. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, considering the question as if it were more complicated than it appeared. "I have had many names," he said. "The people who lived here before the Spanish came called me something that cannot be pronounced with a human tongue. The conquistadors called me El Diablo because they could not understand what they were seeing. The villagers down the mountain call me El Dueño del Monte, the master of the forest, the owner of the wild places." He spread his arms, and the trees around us swayed in response, bending toward him like subjects bowing to a king. But names are just sounds. What matters is what I am, and what you are becoming. I pushed myself to my feet. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to hold my weight. I would not kneel before this man, whatever he was. "I am not becoming anything," I said. "I am a software developer. I live in a cabin. I came out here to fix my internet cable." The man laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but it was not kind either. It was the laugh of someone who has heard the same joke 1,000 times and still finds it amusing. "You are what you eat," he said. "You are what you drink. You are what you breathe. And for 2 years you have been consuming the forest." He stepped closer. I wanted to step back, but my feet would not move. "The water in that stream is not ordinary water. It comes from deep within the mountain, filtered through roots that have been growing since before your ancestors learned to walk upright. That water carries something with it, a piece of the forest, a seed." His eyes held mine. I could not look away. "Every time you drank from that stream, you were planting that seed deeper inside yourself, watering it, helping it grow, and now it has taken root." "That does not make sense," I said. My voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Water is water. H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. It does not carry seeds or magic or whatever you are talking about. Does it not?" The man reached out and touched a nearby tree. As I watched, the bark beneath his fingers rippled like water, like the surface of a pond when you drop a stone into it. "You modern people," he said, "you think you understand the world because you have given names to things. Hydrogen, oxygen, molecules, atoms. You break everything into smaller and smaller pieces and believe that knowing the pieces means knowing the whole." He pulled his hand away. The bark was smooth again, as if nothing had happened. "But there are things that exist between the pieces, things that live in the spaces your science cannot measure, things that were here before humans evolved and will be here long after you are gone." He turned back to me. "The Aztecs knew this. The Maya knew this. The Olmec knew this. They called us by different names, worshipped us in different ways, but they understood the truth. The forest is not just trees and animals and soil. The forest is alive, conscious, hungry. And you control it," I said. It was not a question. "Control?" The man shook his head. "No one controls the forest. But some of us have learned to speak its language, to ask for its gifts, to serve its needs in exchange for a portion of its power. He stepped closer again, close enough that I could smell him. Earth and leaves and something else, something ancient and green and alive. My family has served the forest for generations beyond counting. We were here before the pyramids were built, before the first cities rose from the jungle. We learned to drink from the sacred streams and eat from the sacred groves and breathe the sacred air. And in return, the forest gave us abilities that your science would call impossible. Nahuales, I whispered. The word came from somewhere deep in my memory, a story my grandmother had told me when I was a child, about shamans who could transform into animals, who could control the weather, who could bend nature to their will. The man's smile widened. So you do know something of the old ways. Yes, Nahuales, that is one of the names. We are the bridge between the human world and the wild world, the translators, the intermediaries. He reached out and tapped my chest with one finger. The touch sent a jolt through my entire body like electricity, but warmer, more alive. And now, whether you wanted it or not, you're becoming one of us. I shook my head. No, that is impossible. I just drank some water. I did not perform any rituals. I did not ask for any powers. I did not agree to anything. Agreement is not always verbal, the man said. Every time you drank from that stream, you were accepting a gift from the forest. And gifts always come with obligations. That is the oldest law, older than human language, older than human thought. He stepped back and spread his arms again. You have been changing for 2 years, slowly, gradually. The forest has been growing inside you, putting down roots in your mind and your soul. You probably noticed things, dreams that felt more real than waking, a sense of connection to the trees around your cabin. The feeling that you could almost hear something speaking in the rustle of leaves. I had noticed those things. I had dismissed them as the effects of isolation, the natural result of spending too much time alone in nature. But deep down, I had known something was different. Something was changing. What happens now? I asked. The man lowered his arms. Now you learn what you have become, and you decide whether to embrace it or fight it. He turned and began walking deeper into the forest. The trees parted before him, branches lifting out of his way roots, sinking into the soil to clear his path. Come, he said without looking back. I will show you what the forest can do, and what you can do if you are willing. I should have run. Every rational thought in my head was screaming at me to turn around and flee, to get back to my cabin, pack my things, drive down the mountain, and never return. But my feet were already moving, following him, as if the choice had been made for me. Maybe it had been made 2 years ago, the first time I knelt beside that stream and cupped the cool water in my hands. We walked for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The forest around us was unlike anything I had seen before. The trees were older, larger, their trunks so thick that 10 men could not have joined hands around them. The canopy overhead was so dense that no moonlight penetrated. We walked in perfect darkness, guided only by the faint glow that seemed to emanate from the man ahead of me. He did not use a flashlight. He did not need one. The forest itself lit his way, phosphorescent fungi glowing on tree trunks, bioluminescent insects drifting through the air like living stars. The forest provides for those who serve it, he said, as if reading my thoughts. Light, food, shelter, protection, everything a person could need. And in return, he glanced back at me. His eyes caught the faint glow and reflected it, making them look like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. In return, we give the forest what it needs, our service, our devotion, our... He paused, searching for the right word. Our participation. I did not ask what that meant. I was not sure I wanted to know. We emerged into a clearing. Or rather, the forest created a clearing for us trees, stepping aside to form a circle of open ground maybe 20 meters across. The sky was visible overhead, stars scattered across the blackness like diamonds on velvet. The man stopped in the center of the clearing and turned to face me. "You do not believe what I have told you," he said. "Your modern mind rejects it, searches for rational explanations, tells you that what you have seen tonight must be hallucinations or tricks or some kind of elaborate prank." He was right. Even after everything I had witnessed, part of me was still trying to explain it away. Gas leaks causing hallucinations, some kind of fungal spore affecting my perception, anything except the truth that was standing right in front of me. "So, I will give you proof," he said, "something you can test for yourself." He pointed to a small tree at the edge of the clearing. It was young, maybe 5 years old, barely taller than I was. A sapling compared to the giants surrounding us. "Look at that tree," he said. "Focus on it. Think about it moving. Picture it in your mind, leaning to the left." I stared at him. "You want me to move a tree with my mind?" "I want you to try." "That is insane. Telekinesis is not real. It is science fiction." The man's smile did not waver. "Your phone died tonight. Your flashlight failed. You watched the ground swallow a truck. You saw trees walk. And yet you still cling to your belief that such things are impossible." He shook his head slowly. "Try. What do you have to lose?" I looked at the tree. It was just a tree. Bark and wood and leaves. A living thing, yes, but not conscious. Not something that could be commanded by human thought. But I had seen trees walk tonight. I had seen the earth open like a mouth and devour metal and glass. I had felt something breathing on my neck in the darkness. If those things were possible, then maybe this was too. I focused on the tree, pictured it in my mind, imagined it leaning to the left, its trunk bending, its branches tilting. Nothing happened. I concentrated harder, squeezed my eyes shut, willed the tree to move with every fiber of my being. Still nothing. I opened my eyes and looked at the man. "See, I cannot—" The sound cut me off. A crack so loud it echoed off the surrounding trees like a gunshot. I spun toward the source. Behind the sapling I had been focusing on, a much larger tree had lost a branch. The limb, thick as my forearm, had snapped clean off and was hanging by a few splinters of wood. Sap oozed from the wound, dark and viscous in the starlight. I had not been looking at that tree. I had not been thinking about that tree. But in the moment of concentration, my mind had wandered. For just a second, my attention had drifted to the larger tree behind my target, and something had responded. "There," the man said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "You felt it. The connection. The forest heard you even if your aim was poor." I stared at the broken branch. The sap was still flowing, dripping onto the forest floor in slow, heavy drops. It looked like blood. It smelled like blood, too copper and iron mixed with the green scent of chlorophyll. "I did that," I whispered. "I actually did that. The power is weak in you, unfocused. You have been absorbing the forest's essence for 2 years, but you have never learned to direct it. It leaks out in random directions, affecting things you did not intend to affect." The man walked over to the damaged tree and placed his hand on the wound. I watched as the broken branch began to reattach itself. Splinters wove back together. Bark crept across the exposed wood. Within seconds, the limb was whole again, as if it had never been broken. "With practice, you could learn to do this as well," he said, "to break and to heal, to command and to nurture. The forest does not distinguish between creation and destruction. They are both forms of change, and change is what the forest craves." He turned back to me. "But there is much more than moving branches. Let me show you what the forest is truly capable of." He did not make any visible gesture. He did not speak any words. He simply stood there, and the world went mad. The ground began to shake. Not an earthquake tremor, but something more alive, more intentional. Like the heartbeat of something enormous buried beneath the soil. All around the clearing, the trees began to move. Not walking this time, but writhing, twisting. Their branches reached toward the sky and then swept down toward the earth. Their trunks spiraled and bent in ways that should have shattered wood. Their roots erupted from the ground like tentacles waving in the air before plunging back into the soil. The noise was indescribable. creaking and groaning and cracking wood under stress fibers being torn and reformed. Beneath it all, a sound like breathing, like the entire forest was one living organism inhaling and exhaling in rhythm with the chaos. Leaves fell in torrents, creating whirlwinds that spun through the clearing. The air was thick with debris, bark fragments, and twigs, and bits of moss swirling around us in a vortex of organic matter. And through it all, the man stood perfectly still, perfectly calm, the eye of a storm that he had created with nothing but his will. Then I saw the deer. It burst into the clearing from somewhere to my left, running in blind panic. A young doe, its eyes white with terror foam dripping from its mouth. It was trying to escape the chaos, trying to find a path through the writhing trees. It did not see what was waiting for it. The ground opened. There is no other way to describe it. The soil simply parted like lips opening to receive food. One moment there was solid earth, and the next there was a hole, not a sinkhole, not a natural cavity, a mouth. A hungry, waiting mouth. The deer's front legs went in first. It screamed. I did not know deer could scream, but this one did. A sound of pure animal terror that cut through the noise of the moving trees and lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. The deer tried to pull itself out. Its back legs scrabbled against the edge of the whole hooves, digging into the soil muscles, straining. For a moment I thought it might escape. Then the roots came. They shot up from the depths of the hole, dozens of them thin and pale like the fingers of corpses. They wrapped around the deer's legs, its body, its neck. They pulled. The deer slid deeper into the earth. Its screams became muffled, then stopped entirely as its head disappeared below the surface. And then I heard it, the sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. Chewing, slow, methodical, patient. The sound of something enormous eating something that had been alive seconds ago. The ground closed over the deer like a wound healing. Within moments there was no sign that anything had happened, just smooth soil and scattered leaves. The shaking stopped, the trees became still, the debris settled to the ground. Silence. I was on my knees. I did not remember falling, but there I was, hands pressed against the cold earth, vomiting up everything in my stomach. The sounds I was making were not human. Whimpering, gagging, the noises of an animal in distress. The man walked over and stood beside me. He did not try to help me up. He did not offer comfort. He simply waited. "The forest must eat," he said, when my retching finally stopped. "All living things must eat. Plants consume sunlight and water. Herbivores consume plants. Carnivores consume herbivores. And the forest consumes everything." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. "That deer," I managed. "You killed it. The forest killed it. I merely opened the door." "That is the same thing." The man shrugged. "Perhaps. But is the farmer who slaughters a pig evil? Is the hunter who kills a deer for food? Life feeds on life. That is the way of all things. The forest is simply more honest about it than most." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at him that what I had just witnessed was not feeding, it was murder. But the words would not come. Some part of me understood that human morality did not apply here, that the rules I had lived by meant nothing in this place. The forest was not evil. It was not good. It simply was. And it was hungry. "I have shown you what the forest can do," the man said. "Now let me show you what it can give." He reached down and placed his hand on my forehead. His palm was warm, warmer than human flesh should be, and rough like bark. The world disappeared. I was standing on a beach, not the forest, not the mountains, a beach. White sand stretching in both directions as far as I could see, blue water lapping at the shore, a sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. I could feel everything, the warmth of the sand beneath my bare feet, the salt breeze on my skin, the sound of waves rolling in steady and eternal, the smell of the ocean clean and vast and alive. I was not dreaming. This was too real to be a dream. Every detail was perfect, every sensation vivid and immediate. I walked toward the water. The waves rushed up to meet me, cool against my ankles. I looked down and saw my reflection in the receding foam. My face, my body. Exactly as they should be. I turned and looked back at the beach. There was nothing behind me but sand and palm trees and the endless sky. No forest, no darkness, no man with ancient eyes, just peace, perfect, absolute peace. For a moment I let myself believe it was real, let myself forget everything that had happened, let myself exist in this beautiful, impossible place. Then the sunset flickered, like a screen glitching, like a video buffering. The colors stuttered, repeated, stuttered again, and I was back in the forest. Darkness, cold, the smell of earth and decay. The man standing in front of me, his hand still on my forehead. He removed his hand and stepped back. An illusion, I said. My voice was hollow. You put that in my head. Yes. It was not real. Reality is more flexible than you believe. What you experienced was real to your senses, real to your mind. The only thing that made it an illusion was that it did not persist when I removed my hand. He looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been hunger. I could not tell the difference anymore. With practice, you could learn to create such illusions yourself, to shape the perceptions of others, to make them see what you want them to see, feel what you want them to feel. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why show me any of this? The man was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Because you have already begun the transformation. The water you have been drinking, the air you have been breathing, they have changed you. You cannot go back to what you were. The only choice you have is whether to understand what you are becoming, or to stumble through the process blind. He turned and began walking back into the forest. Go home now. Think about what you have seen. When you are ready to learn more, I will find you. The trees parted before him, closing behind him like a curtain. Within seconds he had vanished into the darkness. I stood alone in the clearing, shaking. Then I ran. I do not know what direction I chose. I do not know if I chose any direction at all. I simply ran, crashing through undergrowth, ducking under branches, stumbling over roots that seemed to reach up deliberately to trip me. The forest was not helping me now. If anything, it was fighting me. Branches whipped across my face, leaving stinging cuts on my cheeks. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin. The ground was uneven, treacherous, and I fell more times than I could count. The first fall split my knee open on a rock. I felt the impact, felt the skin tear, felt the warm blood soaking through my jeans. The pain was sharp and immediate, cutting through the fog of terror in my mind. I got up and kept running. The second fall drove a branch into my palm. I looked down and saw a splinter of wood embedded in the flesh, surrounded by welling blood. I pulled it out without thinking, gasped at the pain, and kept moving. Behind me I could hear sounds, not footsteps, something worse. The groaning of wood, the tearing of roots, the whisper of leaves that sounded like laughter. The forest was chasing me. I ran faster, my lungs burned, my legs screamed. Every breath was agony, every step a battle against muscles that wanted nothing more than to collapse. I fell a third time. This time I did not get up immediately. I lay face down in the dirt chest, heaving blood dripping from my various wounds onto the dead leaves beneath me. I cannot do this, I thought. I cannot outrun a forest. I cannot escape something that is everywhere around me. The sounds were getting closer. I could feel the ground trembling beneath my cheek. The trees were coming, the earth was coming, everything was coming for me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I closed my eyes. This is how it ends, in the dirt, alone. Eaten by the thing I had been feeding for 2 years, I waited for the roots to wrap around my body, for the ground to open beneath me, for the chewing sounds to begin. Nothing happened. The trembling stopped. The sounds faded. The forest went quiet. Slowly, not believing it was over, I opened my eyes. I was lying in front of my cabin. The porch was 3 meters from my face. The light I had left on in the window was glowing yellow and warm. The door was right there, safety and shelter in the world I understood. I did not remember reaching this place. I did not remember the forest releasing me. One moment I was lying in the middle of nowhere waiting to die, and the next I was home. I dragged myself up the steps. Every movement was agony. My knee was still bleeding, leaving a trail of red drops on the wooden planks. My hand throbbed where the splinter had been. My face stung from a dozen small cuts. I fumbled with the door handle. My fingers were slick with blood and sweat, and it took 3 tries before I managed to turn it. I stumbled inside and slammed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, leaning against the door, breathing. Then I locked it. The deadbolt, the chain. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle. Only then did I let myself collapse. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, back against the wood legs stretched out in front of me. The pain was everywhere now, a symphony of hurts competing for attention. But I was alive. I did not understand how. I did not understand why the forest had let me go. But I was alive. The silence was the first thing I noticed once my breathing slowed. Complete silence, absolute. Not the normal quiet of the forest at night with its chorus of insects and owls and rustling leaves. This was the silence of a held breath, of something waiting. I turned my head and looked out the window. The forest was dark, still. Not a single branch moving, not a single sound. It was watching. I could feel it. Thousands of eyes made of bark and leaves and darkness, all focused on my cabin. On me. Watching, waiting, but not attacking, not anymore. I pushed myself to my feet, walked to the table where my laptop sat. The screen was still on, showing the upload progress bar that had frozen hours ago, except it was not frozen anymore. The bar showed 100%, upload complete, connection stable. I checked the router, green lights, everything working perfectly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. My phone was lying on the table where I must have left it before going out. I did not remember bringing it back inside. I picked it up dreading what I would see. 73% battery, 1 bar of signal, exactly what it had shown before I left, like time had rewound, like none of it had happened, but my knee was still bleeding, my hand was still torn. My face was still covered in scratches. Those were real. The pain was real, which meant everything else was real, too. I sank into my chair and stared at the wall. Outside, the silence continued. The forest was not attacking. It was not trying to get in. It was just there, waiting, patient, as if it knew that sooner or later I would come back out, as if it knew that I already belonged to it. I sat there until dawn. I did not sleep. I did not move. I just sat and listened to the silence and tried to convince myself that what I had experienced was not real. A dream, a hallucination, some kind of breakdown caused by too much isolation. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the deer disappearing into the earth. I heard the chewing sounds. I felt the man's hand on my forehead and the impossible warmth of the beach that did not exist. And when I looked at my wound still fresh and bleeding, I knew that no dream had ever drawn blood. The first rays of sunlight crept through my window. The forest outside looked normal in the morning light, just trees and grass and the path leading down toward the stream where I had been drinking water for 2 years. I would never drink from it again. I knew that now. Whatever I had been putting into my body, whatever seed had been planted inside me, I would not give it any more nourishment. But even as I made that resolution, I felt something stir in my chest, a pull, a longing, like being hungry for something you know you should not eat. The forest was inside me. The man had been right about that, and it was not going to leave just because I stopped drinking its water. I was changing, had been changing for 2 years, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. All I could do was wait and see what I was becoming. 3 days passed before I found the courage to leave the cabin. I spent those days trying to convince myself that none of it had happened. That the forest walking, the deer being swallowed, the man with ancient eyes, all of it had been some kind of breakdown. A psychotic episode triggered by isolation and stress. The kind of thing that happens to people who spend too much time alone. I cleaned my wounds and bandaged them with supplies from my first aid kit. The cuts on my face scabbed over. The gash on my knee closed slowly. The hole in my palm where the splinter had been became a tender pink scar. Physical evidence that something had happened, even if I refused to believe what that something was. I worked on my laptop, answered emails, submitted code, pretended to be a normal person living a normal life in a cabin in the mountains. The internet worked perfectly now, as if it had never failed. I did not drink from the stream. I had bottled water stored in the cabin, enough for a week if I was careful. After that, I would need to drive down to the village, but I would not drink from that stream. Not ever again. On the fourth night, I dreamed of the forest. Not a nightmare. That was the strange part. In the dream, I was flying above the treetops, looking down at the canopy spread beneath me like a green ocean. I could feel every tree, every branch, every leaf. They were part of me, and I was part of them, connected in a way that words could not describe. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in years, and the feeling did not go away. Even with my eyes open, even sitting in my cabin surrounded by walls and furniture and all the trappings of human civilization, I could still sense the forest. It was faint, like a radio station playing at low volume in another room, but it was there, a constant presence at the edge of my awareness. I told myself it was just my imagination, residual anxiety from the trauma I had experienced, my brain trying to process what it had seen by keeping the neural pathways active. But on the fifth day, I tested it. I stood on my porch looking at a small bush about 10 meters away. Nothing special, just a mountain shrub with dark green leaves and thin branches. I focused on it, pictured it moving, imagined the leaves rustling, the branches swaying. The bush shook. Not much, not dramatically, just a slight tremor as if a breeze had passed through. But there was no breeze. The air was perfectly still. The trees around the bush were motionless. Only the bush had moved, because I had wanted it to move. I went back inside and did not come out for 2 more days. A month passed. I wish I could say that things returned to normal, that I forgot about that night in the forest and went back to my ordinary life of coding and isolation. But that is not what happened. The power grew stronger. Every day I could feel the connection more clearly. The forest was no longer a faint radio station. It was a symphony playing constantly in my mind. I could sense animals moving through the underbrush. I could feel the slow pulse of sap rising through tree trunks. I could hear or almost hear the whisper of roots communicating beneath the soil. I started spending more time outside. At first I told myself it was just for fresh air. Then I admitted that I wanted to be closer to the trees. Then I stopped making excuses altogether. I would sit on my porch for hours, eyes closed, just feeling. The forest welcomed me in a way that human society never had. It did not judge, it did not demand small talk or social niceties. It simply existed, vast and ancient and patient, and it let me exist alongside it. I stopped caring about my work. Deadlines that had once seemed urgent now felt meaningless. What did it matter if some company in New York got their code a day late? What did any of it matter compared to the slow, eternal rhythm of growth and decay that pulsed through the mountain? I stopped caring about people. The emails in my inbox went unanswered. The messages from old acquaintances were ignored. I had never liked humans much to begin with. Now they seemed like insects, small and brief and unimportant. Their concerns were not my concerns. Their world was not my world. Not anymore. It was a Tuesday night about 5 weeks after the incident when he came back. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a screen full of code that no longer made sense to me. The symbols and syntax that had once been my native language now looked like meaningless scratches, like the writings of a civilization I had once belonged to but could no longer remember. The light in the room changed. It was subtle at first, a slight dimming as if a cloud had passed over the moon. Then it grew stronger shadows, deepening the warm glow of my lamp, seeming to retreat into itself. I looked up. He was standing at the edge of the forest, the same man, the same weathered clothes, the same ancient eyes. He was maybe 30 meters from my cabin, barely visible in the darkness, but I knew it was him. I could feel him. His presence was like a bonfire in my forest sense, blazing with power that made everything around him seem pale and small. He raised his hand and waved. A friendly gesture. The kind of wave you might give to a neighbor you had not seen in a while. I looked at my window. The glass was melting, not breaking, not cracking, melting. The solid pane was becoming liquid, flowing downward like honey, distorting everything I could see through it. The trees outside twisted and writhed in the warped glass. The sky bent into impossible angles. The man's figure stretched and compressed, becoming something inhuman before snapping back to normal. Images flashed through the melting glass, the forest moving, the earth opening, the deer disappearing into darkness, the beach that had felt more real than reality. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The window was solid again, normal, as if nothing had happened. I looked outside. The man was gone, but I knew he had not really left. He was out there somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting. He would always be watching, because I was his now. I belonged to the forest, and the forest was his domain. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the forest pulse around me like a second heartbeat. The connection was stronger than ever. I could sense things I had never sensed before. The slow movement of tectonic plates far beneath the mountain, the electrical impulses of insects navigating by starlight, the dreams of birds sleeping in the branches. I was becoming something else, something that was not quite human anymore. At some point I got up and walked to the bathroom. I needed to see myself, needed to confirm that I was still me, still Martin, still the person I had been before all of this started. I turned on the light and looked in the mirror. My face stared back at me. The same face I had seen every day for 32 years. The same nose, the same jaw, the same hair that was starting to thin at the temples. But the eyes were wrong. They were green. Not the green of human eyes, that murky hazel that some people have. This was a deeper green, brighter. The green of moss growing on ancient stones, the green of leaves in the heart of summer, the green of something that had never been human at all. And deep within that green, in the very center of my pupils, something was moving. Something was looking out through my eyes, watching the world through my face. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of soap, banging my hip against the doorframe. My breath came in short gasps. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I looked in the mirror again, my eyes were brown, normal, human, but I knew what I had seen, and I knew it would come back. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my chair, watching the window, waiting for dawn. The knocking started around 3 in the morning. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, exactly like the ones I had heard the night before everything began. But this time the sound did not come from outside. It came from inside the cabin, from the wardrobe in my bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. I did not open it. I did not open it the next night either, when the knocking came again, or the night after that. But every night the sound continues. 3 knocks, patient, waiting. And every morning when I look in the mirror, my eyes are a little greener than they were the day before. I do not know how much time I have left. How many nights before the transformation is complete? How many mornings before I look in the mirror and see nothing human looking back? But I know what comes after. One day I will stop fighting. I will open that wardrobe door and embrace whatever is waiting inside. I will walk into the forest and never come back. I will become what the man is, what the forest wants me to be. And then someday I will be the one standing outside someone else's window. I will be the one knocking on their door at 3 in the morning. I will be the one who welcomes them into the family that has no name and no end. The forest is patient. It has been waiting for millions of years. It can wait a little longer. If you're reading this, I have one piece of advice. Be careful where you drink. That stream in the mountains, that spring in the forest, that well in the abandoned property, the water looks clean and tastes sweet. But you do not know what is dissolved in it. You do not know what ancient things have bled into those depths. Every sip is a signature. Every swallow is a contract. And some contracts cannot be broken. I have to go now. The knocking has started again, louder tonight, more insistent. I think tonight might be the night I finally open that door. Wish me luck, or do not. It probably will not matter either way. The forest always gets what it wants in the end. Have you ever experienced something in the wilderness that you could not explain? A path that vanished behind you, trees that seemed closer than they should have been, water that tasted too sweet, too perfect, too good to be natural. Tell me your story in the comments. And if you live near a forest, do me a favor. Check your eyes in the mirror tonight, just to be sure they are still the color they are supposed to be.